Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back on this very dark, cold, very windy, rainy British night. Perfect night for this particular topic. Over the last 3 days, I have just finished binge watching the two Netflix series, The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor. And that gave me the idea for this vid. I love ghost stories when they're done right. I like them suitably freaky. And I've often found that ghosts are a very difficult topic to properly portray in role-playing games. The reason being that I've yet to find a game that did it right, or did it properly thematically. Pardon me. From Dungeons and Dragons through to games like Call of Cthulhu, ghosts are presented as a monster with stats. And the moment you give stats to anything, you make it possible to be defeated by the players and their characters. You know the old saying, if it has stats, we can kill it. It's one of the reasons why I dislike the idea of gods and deities having stat blocks in games, because they are things beyond the ken of characters, regardless of how powerful they get. And I think ghosts are something that shouldn't have stat blocks. And ghosts in role-playing games fall into two brackets, much as they do if you were to look into hauntings in the real world, regardless of whether you believe in them or not. You get two types. You have intelligent hauntings and you have residual hauntings. Intelligent hauntings are where you have a spirit of a person inhabiting a location, or attached to an item, attached to a person. And this is very much what we see in role-playing games. It is a spirit, it is an entity, a creature, or an undead creature, that you can potentially interact with. It's intelligent, even if it is an evil, malevolent entity. And this falls into that problem I spoke about, that in order to do that, you have to give it a stat block, at which point players can just fight it as a monster. They can use magic and they can use magic weapons, and there's nothing to it. A monster just becomes another orc in a dungeon. With residual hauntings, the idea in the real world is that they are where a location or an object or something has imprinted an emotional response and it replays. I believe it's called like the stone tablet effect by parapsychologists. And Pathfinder First Edition had something to utilise this. They called it haunts. And the idea was that an area could trigger an effect related to the emotional event that created it. So you could have let's say a castle or a manor house or something like that. You've got a bride-to-be on the eve of her wedding to her beloved, and the news comes through that he's dead. He's been assassinated. He's been murdered. Maybe big brigands killed him on the way to the manor house for the wedding. Distraught and not knowing what to do in her grief, she climbs to the highest tower of the building and basically throws herself through the stained glass window, good old gothic horror fashion, and plummets to her death in the grounds below. She doesn't come back as a ghost, but the haunting manifests to the point where that room becomes a reputation. It's cold. It's people feel uncomfortable. And the way a haunt worked in Pathfinder First Edition was that if you went in there, you could become affected by the emotion and relive the events, both in your mind and physically. So you could have to make a will save, for example, or you follow the actions of that bride, and you would throw yourself through whatever remains of that window at this point in time and plummet to the ground to your death, or however many d6 damage. It could also be something different than that. A haunt in Pathfinder First could be used to manifest the rage of somebody. And this is where we get our movie style, what they call it, jump scares, where suddenly someone turns around out of the dark. You have the sort of, that was my evil ghost impression there. And that's where you might have it emulate a spell rather than some other effect, and it might emulate something like a what's it called, phantasmal killer, where you have to make a save to realise that it's not real, or it's not actually there, or you die of fright. You could overcome it by I think channel positive energy or turn undead sort of effect could lay the haunt temporarily, but it would come back, and even once it triggered, when someone walked into that room, that location, wherever, it could come back, and probably will do. You had to do a quest, much like artifacts have to be destroyed by a very specific quest. Haunts had to be laid to rest permanently by doing something. In this case, maybe you've got to reunite the remains of the two lovers together, at which point they are together for eternity and the haunting fades away. But these are just game mechanics. They're not storytelling mechanics. And ghosts, I think, in role-playing games, just as they do in stories and media, work best as a story mechanic. So with that in mind, do ghosts really work in role-playing games? As I say, even Call of Cthulhu uses stat blocks, which I find, for ghosts, which I find really weird. I'm going to say yes and no. I'm going to say yes because if you've got the right players and maybe the right game, players who are willing to do that fully immersive and tell a story and even put themselves, their characters rather, not themselves, at risk and fully integrate themselves into a story, indie RPG style maybe, then it could work. But even then, we would fall back on that old adage of, if you want to tell that sort of story, write a book. I hate it when people say that on forums and the like, but in this instance, that's maybe more true. I'm also going to say no for these very reasons. Role-playing games are games built around mechanics, and you can't emulate the sort of thing we read about in books or TV series or films very, very well. And I think that's the problem. Ghosts are relegated to being a monster and nothing else. You can have a backstory to it, but in my experience, generally players don't really care that much unless it's overly relevant to the story. Unless it's relevant to them defeating the ghost. If they can't lay it to rest without knowing why it's here, whether they magic missile it to death or turn undead or whatever, it doesn't generally matter. It's a monster, and that's the problem. So I'm going to throw that out to you guys. I'm interested to see what you think. Can you do a proper ghost story? And if so, how? I think that would be an interesting topic for discussion. So drop your comments, your thoughts below. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like. That'd be really nice. And I look forward to your thoughts on ghosts and whether they are a proper ghost story is playable in a role-playing game. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Good gaming.